My son called me dead weight in front of 12 board members. And they all laughed. The sound wasn't just the chair. It was the sound of something breaking. Something that had been fraying for a long, long time. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I simply looked at my son, this stranger in a $5,000 suit, grabbed my purse, and walked straight to my car. 3 hours later, I was on a plane to Austin with nothing but my credit card and a fury that could power the entire state of Texas. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you know what it's like to have everything you thought was solid turn to dust, hit that like and subscribe button. This is a story for anyone who's ever been counted out. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I ended up in that humiliating boardroom in the first place. 3 months earlier, my husband, Arthur, died of a sudden heart attack at 59. He was the love of my life, my business partner, my best friend. The foundation of my world crumbled in a single, silent moment in our bedroom. He was there, breathing, dreaming, and then he was just gone. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy, wet-wool blanket smothering me. I moved through the days in a haze, the world muted and distant. Arthur wasn't just my husband, he was the charismatic CEO of Pinnacle Software Solutions, the company we built together from a 2-person operation working out of our sun-drenched garage. For 25 years, I was his strategist, his confidant, the one who handled the client relationships he found tedious and smoothed the internal politics he hated. I was the architect in the background, while he was the dazzling frontman. Our son Leo was 32. He'd been groomed for leadership, moving through the departments we'd carefully designed. Marketing, sales, operations. Everyone, the employees, the board, the industry press, naturally assumed he'd step into his father's shoes. It was the succession plan, just accelerated tragically. I should have seen the signs. The way Leo started scheduling executive meetings without including me on the invite. How he dismissed my suggestions about a struggling account with a patronizing smile and let me handle the business side, Mom. You just focus on healing. The subtle, almost imperceptible eye rolls from his sycophants when I'd ask for clarification on a quarterly report. These were relationships I'd helped nurture since before Leo could spell venture capital. But I was drowning in a grief so profound it felt like a full-time occupation. So I let it slide. I told myself he was just eager, a young stallion testing his strength, maybe a little overwhelmed by the sudden, crushing responsibility. Arthur had always planned a gradual transition, a 5-year mentorship, a slow passing of the torch. But death doesn't wait for convenient timing. Cancer, heart attacks, they don't check your calendar. The morning of that fateful board meeting, Leo had summoned me, to attend what he called a strategic planning session for our new direction. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from a lifetime of being the prepared one, the reliable one. I wore my armor, a tailored navy blue suit and the single strand of pearls Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary. They felt like a talisman, a connection to the man who would have never let this happen. I thought I was there as a partner, a founding member who still held a significant 30% of the shares. I was wrong. The moment I walked into that glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, I could feel the atmospheric shift. The air was thick with unspoken collusion. Marcus Webb, our longtime attorney, and a man who'd eaten at our Thanksgiving table for 20 years, suddenly found the pattern of the mahogany table fascinating. Sarah Chun, our brilliant head of operations, was nervously clicking her pen, a rapid-fire staccato of anxiety. Even Janet Morrison, who'd been with us since year 2, who'd held my hand in the hospital when Leo was born, wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze locked on her leather-bound notebook. And Leo stood at the head of the table, silhouetted against the panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. He was all confidence and expensive tailoring, every inch the successful, modern executive. He looked like his father, but without the warmth in his eyes. "Good morning, everyone," he said, flashing that disarming, charming smile that used to make my heart swell when he was 5 and showing me a crayon drawing. "I've called this meeting to discuss some necessary, forward-thinking changes as we boldly move into Pinnacle's next chapter." He clicked a button on his laptop, and a slick PowerPoint presentation illuminated the screen. The first slide read, "Streamlining operations for maximum efficiency and agility." I settled into my usual seat, to the right of the head chair, Arthur's old chair, now Leo's. I expected to hear about departmental restructuring, maybe a new CRM system, a pivot in our service offerings. Instead, Leo launched into a 20-minute monologue filled with corporate buzzwords I despised. Synergy, paradigm shift, disruptive innovation. He spoke of eliminating redundancies and removing legacy obstacles to progress. He emphasized the critical need for fresh perspectives and modern, data-driven approaches to leadership. He was a poet of profit margins, weaving a narrative of necessary evolution. For 20 minutes, he danced around his point with the grace of a seasoned politician. Then, he clicked to the next slide. My blood didn't boil, it froze. Solid. The slide was titled, starkly, Cost-Benefit Analysis, Non-Essential Personnel and Sentimental Liabilities. My name was at the very top of the list. As you can see from the data, Leo continued, his voice taking on that lecturing, condescending tone he perfected at Wharton, we are carrying several positions that, while historically significant, no longer contribute directly to our bottom-line growth. Roles filled by individuals who are here more for sentimental reasons than business necessity. I felt the eyes of the room on me, a dozen pairs of lasers burning into my skin. I was a specimen under a microscope, a dinosaur in pearls. That's when he said it, the words that would be seared into my memory forever, playing on a loop in my quietest moments. It's time, he said, his gaze finally meeting mine, not with love or regret, but with cold, corporate finality, to cut the dead weight. Starting with my mother, there was a beat of absolute, deafening silence. Then, the laughter came. It wasn't a roar of malicious joy. No, it was worse. It was a nervous, tittering, uncomfortable chuckling. The sound of people who knew this was wrong, deeply wrong, but were too cowardly, too complicit, to do anything but follow the new king's lead. It was the sound of betrayal by committee, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow. I sat there for a moment that stretched into an eternity, processing the surreal horror of the situation. My own flesh and blood had not only orchestrated my professional execution, but had done so with a casually cruel label that reduced 25 years of sweat, sacrifice, and genius to a single, dismissive phrase, dead weight. The old Margaret, Arthur's Margaret, would have stood her ground. She would have reminded them, in meticulous detail, about the multi-million-dollar client from Tokyo she'd single-handedly landed by flying there with pneumonia. She would have recounted the time she navigated the near-bankruptcy crisis of '08 by renegotiating every vendor contract and foregoing her own salary for a year. She would have fought with every fiber of her being for her place at the table she had built with her own two hands. But the woman who slowly rose from that chair was someone new entirely. Someone who had just been stripped of every label, wife, mother, co-founder, and was left with nothing but the raw, unvarnished material of herself. I didn't say a word. I simply gathered my purse, smoothed the skirt of my navy blue suit, a futile, automatic gesture of dignity, and walked to the door. My heels clicked on the polished floor, a steady, metronome-like beat against the sudden, awkward silence that had replaced the laughter. As my hand closed around the cool brass of the door handle, I turned back one last time. My eyes swept the room, landing finally on Leo. "Leo," I said, and my voice was terrifyingly, beautifully steady. "I truly hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember the look on my face when you realize exactly what you've just thrown away." And then I left. Not just the meeting. Not just the building. I left my entire life as I had known it. In the elevator, descending 40 floors, my reflection in the brass doors was a stranger. Her eyes were clear. Her jaw was set. The grief for Arthur was still there, a permanent scar on my heart, but it was now overshadowed by a more immediate, more vital emotion, a pure, undiluted rage. That's when I realized I had two choices. I could stay. I could fight for scraps of respect from people who had just shown me their true colors. I could engage in a protracted, ugly corporate war with my own son, a battle that would poison whatever was left of our relationship. Or I could disappear, completely, and start over somewhere nobody knew me as Arthur's grieving widow or Leo's discarded mother. Guess which one I chose? Packing a life into a single carry-on suitcase, and one check bag teaches you what really matters. And apparently, what mattered to me fit into a 22-inch Rimowa. A few photographs, my passport, my jewelry box, which contained mostly pieces from Arthur, my laptop, a handful of clothes that actually felt like me, not the corporate uniform I'd worn for decades. Everything else, the art, the furniture, the china, the entire museum of a life I'd curated, was just expensive clutter. Props in a play that had just ended. I had exactly 4 hours between leaving that boardroom and my flight's departure. 4 hours to systematically dismantle one existence and crack open the door to another. Most people would call that insane. I called it deficient. The house felt like a tomb when I walked in. Empty. Arthur's reading chair still had the indentation from his body, a coffee stain on the armrest from 1,000 morning rituals. The family photos on the mantel showed a woman with a soft, accommodating smile. A woman who asked for too little. I looked at that woman and I didn't just feel sorry for her. I felt a fierce, protective anger. She deserved better. First, I called Janet Morrison. She answered on the first ring, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper. Margaret? My God, are you okay? What just happened in there was unconscionable. Janet, I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for pleasantries. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. A pause. I could almost hear her conscience warring with her career. Of course. Anything. I need access to the complete client contact database and the archives of my old project files. I want my own copy, emailed to my personal account. Another pause, longer this time. Margaret, you know I can't. That's proprietary company information. Leo would have my head. Janet. My voice was low, steel wrapped in velvet. It was a tone I'd used maybe twice in the decades I'd known her. A tone that brooked no argument. I helped hire you when you were a bright-eyed 22-year-old who couldn't get an interview anywhere else because you didn't have the right pedigree. I trained you myself. I stayed late with you countless nights, teaching you how to read a P&L statement, how to manage a difficult client. I stood up at your wedding. I am not asking you to steal company secrets. I am asking you to email me information that I, personally, created and cultivated. My relationships. My work. The silence on the other end stretched, taut as a wire. Then, a soft sigh of resignation. Give me your personal email address. You'll have it in 20 minutes. Next, I called my banker. Thomas Richardson had handled the Anderson family accounts for 15 years. He'd seen us through the lean years and the fat ones. He knew our family dynamics better than any therapist. Mrs. Anderson, he said, his voice dripping with somber sympathy. I heard about Arthur. I'm so very sorry for your loss. Thank you, Thomas, I said, all business. But that's not why I'm calling. I need to make some significant changes to my accounts. Immediately. Of course. What can I help you with? I want to transfer all of my personal liquid funds, checking, savings, money markets, to a new account at a different institution. I want all future statements sent to a new P.O. box, the address of which I will text you. And I want Leo removed from any and all emergency contact or fiduciary lists. Effective immediately. The silence on his end was profound. I could picture him in his corner office, adjusting his glasses, uncomfortable. Mrs. Anderson. Margaret, are you sure this is the right time to be making such major financial decisions? Grief can cloud one's judgment. Thomas, I said, cutting him off with the same finality I'd used with Janet. I have never been more clear-headed in my life. How quickly can this be done? If you can come into the downtown branch within the hour, he said, his professional demeanor snapping back into place, we can have the transfers initiated by end of business today. While I was downtown, I made a stop at Nordstrom. I didn't go to the conservative, matronly sections I usually frequented. I went to the departments I'd always walked past with a wistful glance. I bought what I pridefully called my new life wardrobe, flowing, wide-leg trousers in cream and black, silk blouses in emerald green and sapphire blue, colors that made me feel alive, not just professional. A buttery soft leather jacket, and boots, beautiful, knee-high boots with a low, confident heel, boots that had attitude. The saleswoman, a stylish woman about my age named Rita, looked at me with a knowing eye as she rang up the considerable total. Starting fresh, she asked, a small, empathetic smile on her face. Something like that, I replied, handing her my black Amex. Let's just say I'm trading up. By 6 p.m., I was at Seattle-Tacoma Airport with my 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and a first-class ticket to Austin. I'd chosen Austin for one simple reason. It was the polar opposite of Seattle's insular, rain-soaked tech scene. It was hot, it was loud, it was weird, and it was booming with energy from an entirely different source. As I waited at my gate, my phone buzzed. Not once, but repeatedly. Leo. The first few calls went straight to voicemail. Then, the texts started flooding in. Mom, where are you? We need to talk. This is ridiculous. Come home so we can discuss this like adults. Janet told me what you did. Having her send you files is theft of company property. I could have her fired. The old Margaret would have felt a stab of guilt, a maternal urge to soothe his panic. The new Margaret read his messages, her face a placid mask. He had made his bed in front of 12 witnesses. Now he could lie in it. I powered my phone down completely, the screen going black. A final, symbolic severance. The flight attendant who escorted me to my first-class seat was a cheerful woman named Carmen who couldn't have been older than Leo. First time in Austin? She asked warmly as I settled into the spacious seat. First time anywhere without a return ticket, I admitted, a strange thrill running through me as I said the words aloud. Carmen's eyes, sharp and perceptive, lit up with understanding. She leaned in slightly, running away from something, or running towards something. I thought about that as the plane lifted off, the lights of Seattle shrinking beneath the clouds into a distant, glittering tapestry of a life I was leaving behind. I watched until they disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. Both, I finally answered, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time in months. Definitely both. During the 3-hour flight, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I dreamed. I let myself imagine a life completely untethered from the past. Not as Arthur's widow, not as Leo's mother, but as Margaret Anderson. A woman with a formidable skill set, a burning drive, and absolutely nothing left to lose. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files Janet had sent. I did what any good businesswoman does when entering unknown territory: research. Austin's economy was a rocket ship. The tech scene was exploding, but it was still young, still chaotic, still hungry. It was a place where experience was a rare and valuable commodity, not a liability. The cost of living was reasonable, the culture celebrated reinvention, and the constant sun felt like a personal promise. By the time the pilot announced our initial descent into Austin Bergstrom, I didn't just have a destination. I had the ghost of a plan. Not just for survival, but for something bigger. Something that would make Leo's little boardroom coup look like a child's tantrum. The woman who had left Seattle that morning was carrying the weight of a lifetime of expectations. The woman who stepped off that plane into the balmy Texas night was traveling light in every sense of the word. The humid air smelled of earth and possibility. That night, in a sleek hotel room overlooking the dark, shimmering ribbon of Lady Bird Lake, I opened a bottle of surprisingly good Texas Cabernet and poured a glass. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and raised my glass to my reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her hair was a little messy from the flight. Her eyes were tired, but there was a new, fierce light in them. A glint of steel. "Here's to you, Margaret," I said softly, the words of vow in the quiet room. "Here's to finding out what dead weight can accomplish when it stops holding other people up and starts building its own damn foundation." The stranger in the window smiled, and for the first time since Arthur died, I smiled back. Finding an apartment in Austin proved easier than finding myself, but both happened with a speed that felt fated. Within 2 weeks, I was living in a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a breathtaking view of the city and the Colorado River. The real estate agent, a vibrant force of nature named Linda Rodriguez, had scanned my financial statements and my crisp, professional references with a raised eyebrow. "Seattle tech executive looking for a complete change of scenery," she'd mused, scrolling through my rental application on her tablet. "We get a lot of that here. Austin has a way of calling to people who need to reinvent themselves." "Is it that obvious?" I'd asked. Linda had laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Honey, I've been selling dreams disguised as real estate for 20 years. You've got that look. The look of someone who just figured out they've been living someone else's life for the past few decades and is finally ready to audition for the lead role in their own." She wasn't wrong. Everything about Austin felt like permission. The thrum of live music spilling out of bars on a Tuesday afternoon. The incredible smells emanating from food trucks parked on every other corner. The way complete strangers made eye contact and actually smiled, instead of hurrying past with their heads down, lost in their own importance. My condo came furnished in a minimalist, modern style, clean lines, neutral colors. It was perfect. I'd left the heavy, traditional furniture of my Seattle life behind, and this blank slate felt like a canvas. The only personal items I'd brought were my clothes, my photos, and my jewelry. I kept Arthur's wedding ring on a simple platinum chain around my neck. Not because I was unable to let go, but as a reminder of the woman who had once been brave enough to love deeply and build fearlessly. She was still in there. She was just getting an upgrade. The first thing I did after signing the 18-month lease was buy a proper coffee machine. Not the intimidating Italian espresso monster Leo had insisted we needed in the office to project success, but a simple, reliable French press. It reminded me of the early days with Arthur, when we'd brew a pot at our kitchen table, surrounded by schematics and big, crazy dreams. While the coffee brewed on my second morning in Austin, the rich aroma filling the sunlit space, I did something that would have horrified the old Margaret. I opened my laptop, pulled up the client database, and started to plan my revenge. Not the messy, emotional kind of revenge that ends in screaming matches and lawsuits. No, this was to be strategic, surgical, and businesslike. The kind of revenge that would make Leo wish he thought twice before calling his mother redundant. I analyzed the data with a cold, clinical eye. Pinnacle Software Solutions had built its reputation on one core competency: taking brilliant, chaotic tech startups and turning them into functional, profitable businesses. We were the company you called when your world-changing idea was being strangled by poor management, unclear processes, and founders who thought passion was a substitute for payroll. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Leo was about to learn this lesson the hard way. As I cross-referenced client lists with profitability reports, a fascinating pattern emerged. Over the past 5 years, nearly 65% of Pinnacle's most profitable, most successful long-term projects had been managed directly by me. Not just supervised, not overseen from a distance. Managed. I had been the one on the phone at 2 a.m. with a panicked CEO in Berlin. I had been the one mediating between visionary, temperamental engineers and the hard, practical realities of business needs. I had been the one who turned their beautiful chaos into sustainable profit. Leo knew how to present the solutions I had designed. He knew how to look the part in a boardroom. But did he know how to diagnose the disease? Did he know how to build the cure from scratch? My phone rang, shattering the morning quiet. An unknown number with a Texas area code. Margaret Anderson, I answered, using my full name, my professional name, for the first time in years. It felt powerful. Ms. Anderson, a young, energetic, slightly stressed male voice said. This is Kevin Murphy from Murphy Ventures. I got your contact information from Linda Rodriguez. She mentioned you might be available for some consulting work. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. I hadn't breathed a word to Linda about looking for work. What kind of consulting are you needing, Kevin? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Management restructuring for a growing tech startup, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. We've raised $12 million in series of funding, but we're hemorrhaging cash and I can't for the life of me figure out why. Linda said you had a particular genius for exactly this type of situation. 3 days later, I was sitting in the vibrant, slightly messy conference room of Murphy Ventures, surrounded by whiteboards covered in frantic equations and motivational posters that seemed to mock the palpable anxiety in the air. I was looking at financial statements that told a story I'd seen dozens of times before. Brilliant product, passionate, talented team, and management systems that belonged in a college dorm room, not a $12 million company. Kevin Murphy was a software genius in his early 30s, with a kind of manic, boundless energy that could either build empires or burn them to the ground, depending on who was steering the ship. His team was a cohort of 6 brilliant engineers, 2 overwhelmed marketing specialists, and a bookkeeper named Brenda, who looked like she was having a perpetual, silent nervous breakdown. The numbers don't make any sense, Kevin explained, gesturing at a projected spreadsheet that resembled abstract art more than a business forecast. We landed 3 major contracts last month, which should be fantastic news, but somehow we're deeper in the red than we were before. It's like we're being punished for success. I spent the next 4 hours doing what I'd done masterfully for 2 decades at Pinnacle. I asked simple, uncomfortable questions. I untangled financial knots. I listened, not just to what they were saying, but to what they weren't. I identified the critical, cavernous gap between what the company was actually doing and what it thought it was doing. The problem was classic, almost textbook, startup syndrome. Too much growth, too fast, without the foundational infrastructure to support it. They were delivering an excellent product, but losing money on every single sale because they hadn't accounted for the true, hidden costs of rapid scaling, the overtime, the rushed shipping, the client support drain, the technical debt. Okay, Kevin, I said, closing my notebook. Here's what's happening. You're trying to run a marathon at a sprinter's pace, and you're tripping over your own feet. I laid it out for him, clear and direct. You're going to implement activity-based costing to understand your true profit per client. You're going to restructure your project management workflow using an Agile Scrum hybrid that I'll design for you. You're going to establish clear, non-negotiable boundaries between development time and delivery timelines. And you, I said, looking pointedly at the trembling Brenda, are going to hire a real, experienced CFO and stop trying to run a multi-million-dollar enterprise on spreadsheets and hope. Kevin looked at me like I'd just performed a magic trick, pulling the solution out of a hat he didn't even know he was wearing. How? How long would something like that take to implement? 6 weeks to build the framework and stop the bleeding, I said, gathering my things. 3 months for full integration and sustainable profitability. It's not complicated, but it requires discipline and someone who understands how to build systems that don't break under pressure. Would you be interested in overseeing the project? He asked, a note of desperate hope in his voice. I pretended to consider it for a moment, but inside I was smiling. This was it. The first step. My rate is $400 an hour, I said, stating it as a simple fact. Plus a 5% bonus of all cost savings achieved in the first year of implementation. Kevin Murphy, to his credit, didn't even blink. When can you start? Walking out of that meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Arthur's death. The pure, unadulterated thrill of professional purpose. Not the grim satisfaction of fixing other people's messes, but the genuine joy of building something better, stronger from the ground up. That evening, I called Linda Rodriguez to thank her for the referral. How on earth did you know I was looking for work? I asked, genuinely curious. She laughed her warm, knowing laugh. Honey, I didn't know for sure, but I've seen enough people starting over to recognize someone who's got serious skills and just needs someone to open a door. Besides, Kevin's been complaining to me for months about needing a corporate whisperer or some such nonsense. I just connected the dots. As I hung up, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in years, someone had recommended me for who I was, Margaret Anderson, problem solver, not for who I was married to or related to. The old Margaret had always been Arthur's wife, or Leo's mom. The new Margaret was being hired as Margaret. That night, I opened another bottle of Texas wine and called it a celebration. Not just of landing my first independent client, but of the delicious discovery that 30 years of hard-won experience doesn't just evaporate because a room full of cowards laughs at you. In fact, I was beginning to suspect that dead weight, when properly forged in the fire of betrayal, could become the steel that builds an empire. Success in Austin didn't knock, it kicked the door down. What started as a trickle became a flash flood. Within 6 months, I'd gone from one desperate startup to a roster of 5 thriving clients. And the transformations were so spectacular it made me wonder why I'd ever settle for playing a supporting role in my own life's work. Murphy Ventures became my flagship success story. Kevin's $12 million headache transformed into a $20 million profit machine once we implemented proper cost controls and project management systems. More importantly, Kevin became my most vocal evangelist. He started bragging about his secret weapon from Seattle to anyone in the Austin tech scene who would listen. Word spread through the city's tight-knit entrepreneurial community like gossip at a church social. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with calls from venture capitalists, startup founders, and even established mid-sized companies who'd heard about the woman who could perform alchemy on business chaos, turning it into sustainable gold. I officially established Anderson Strategic Consulting from my downtown condo. But within 3 months, the constant Zoom calls and growing paperwork necessitated a real office. I found a beautifully converted warehouse in East Austin with exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and soaring ceilings. It had character, soul, something the sterile offices of Pinnacle had always lacked. I hired an assistant, a sharp, impeccably organized 26-year-old named Priya Patel. She had a business acumen that shamed most MBA graduates and managed my calendar and life with the precision of a 5-star general. She graduated top of her class from UT's business school and had been working for a startup that folded 3 weeks after I'd shrewdly hired her away from them. Your 10 a.m. is here, Priya announced one bright Thursday morning in October, 8 months after I'd left Seattle. Rebecca Martinez from CloudSync Solutions. Rebecca was exactly the type of client I was becoming known for helping. A brilliant engineer, she had successfully launched a cloud-based project management software that was gaining serious traction. But her company was hemorrhaging talent faster than she could hire replacements, and her financials were a house of cards. I've heard you're the person to call when everything is actively on fire, Rebecca said, sinking into the chair across from my desk with a look of exhausted desperation. Well, she sighed, everything is on fire. For the next hour, she painted a picture I knew intimately: rapid, uncontrolled growth without the infrastructure to support it, passionate employees burning out from the sheer chaos, and revenue that looked impressive on a graph but evaporated into the black hole of operational inefficiencies. Your turnover rate is killing you, Rebecca, I told her after reviewing her numbers. You're spending more on recruiting, signing bonuses, and training than you're saving by keeping base salaries low. It's a vicious cycle. Every employee who leaves takes invaluable institutional knowledge with them, and every new hire starts the learning curve from zero. But we can't afford to pay competitive Austin salaries yet, she protested. We're still establishing our market position. I leaned back in my chair, the rich leather creaking softly. I remembered 100 similar conversations from my Seattle days. Rebecca, I said, my voice calm and sure. What if I told you that properly managed, strategically deployed, and genuinely valued employees could generate 30 to 40% more revenue per person? And that this increased productivity would not only pay for the salary improvements, but would also significantly boost your bottom line. Her eyes, dull with fatigue moments before, lit up with a flicker of desperate hope. Is that actually possible? Give me 8 weeks, I said, a confident smile playing on my lips. And I'll show you. That project became the template for what I started calling the Anderson method. It was a systematic, holistic approach, a deep analysis of workflow inefficiencies, a strategic restructuring of team responsibilities based on actual strengths, the implementation of performance metrics that actually mattered, and the creation of a sustainable growth framework that could scale intelligently. The results spoke for themselves. CloudSync's employee retention rate jumped from a dismal 50% to 92%. Their per-employee revenue increased by a staggering 38%. Their client satisfaction scores went through the roof because projects were suddenly being delivered on time, on budget, and with fewer drama-induced gray hairs. Rebecca Martinez became another fervent evangelist. Suddenly, I was fielding calls from companies in Dallas, Houston, and even, the irony was not lost on me, back west in California. By December, I had 11 active clients and a waiting list that stretched into the following spring. I hired 2 additional senior consultants, both experienced professionals who'd been tragically underutilized by larger, more bureaucratic firms. Dr. Sarah Kim was a former operations manager who'd been strategically eliminated from a Fortune 500 company during a restructuring, despite having single-handedly transformed their supply chain efficiency, saving them millions. Marcus Thompson was a retired military logistics officer who understood complex systems and human dynamics better than anyone I'd ever met. Together, we were becoming something Austin's business community had never seen before, a consulting firm that didn't just deliver expensive dust-collecting reports. We delivered transformational, tangible results. The financial numbers were staggering. In my first year in Austin, Anderson Strategic Consulting generated more net revenue than my 30% stake in Pinnacle had ever produced in a single year. But more importantly, every single dollar was money I had earned through my own expertise, my own reputation, my own sheer force of will. It was mine, unassailable. I celebrated my first tax-iversary by signing a lease on a larger, even more stunning office space and taking my entire team, Priya, Sarah, Marcus, and 2 new junior analysts, to the best steakhouse in Austin. As we sat around the massive oak table, toasting our success with ridiculously good wine and even better company, Priya asked the question I'd been expecting for months. "Margaret," she said, her head tilted curiously, "do you ever miss it? Seattle." I thought about Leo, probably still running Pinnacle with the same arrogant, surface-level confidence that had driven me away. I thought about the beautiful, empty house I'd shared with Arthur, now sold to a young family who would never know the dreams that had been conceived within its walls. I thought about the woman I'd been there, always accommodating, always softening her edges, always supporting other people's ambitions at the expense of her own. "I miss who I thought I was going to become there," I said finally, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. "But I don't miss who I actually was. That woman was living a supporting role in someone else's story." Sarah raised her glass. "Then here's to becoming the goddamn protagonist." We clinked glasses, the sound of bright, sharp punctuation in the lively room. As we did, my phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. An unknown Seattle number. I glanced at the screen and nearly choked on my Cabernet. "Mom, I heard about your consulting firm from Kevin Murphy. We need to talk." "David." I showed the message to Priya, who read it with the expertly neutral expression of a bomb disposal expert examining a volatile device. "How did he get Kevin's contact information?" she asked, her voice low. That was an excellent question, and one that deserved a strategic answer. Leo had clearly been keeping tabs on me. He'd heard about Anderson Consulting's success. The question was whether he was calling because he genuinely needed my help, or because he saw an opportunity to co-opt my success for his own benefit. Either way, I was no longer the woman who'd walked out of that boardroom. The Margaret Anderson, who built a thriving firm from scratch in a new city, wasn't interested in playing supporting roles in other people's stories anymore. But she was very interested in hearing what her son wanted so badly that he'd track her down after a year of silence. I finished my wine, the rich flavor a celebration on my tongue. I picked up my phone, looked at the message for a moment longer, and then pressed the power button on the side. The screen went black. "Priya," I said, turning back to my team with a serene smile. Where were we? I believe Marcus was about to tell us the story about the alpaca farm and the misplaced server rack. If Leo wanted to talk, he could wait. Dead weight doesn't come running, just because someone finally decides it might be useful after all. Thanks for listening to my story. The journey was far from over in that steakhouse. If you want to hear what happened when my son, Leo, showed up in Austin, determined to get what he wanted, let me know in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated, ever been told you were finished, ever been called dead weight, remember that it's often just the beginning of your greatest chapter. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Your support means the world.